Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us again. This is In Between the Vines. It is our podcast for the Lake Erie Regional Grape Program that is part of Penn State University and Cornell University Specialists for In Extension. We are going to continue our talk today on soil tests, how you read your results, what that means to you, and a little bit more about soil fertility, building on the cation exchange capacity podcast that we did 2 podcasts ago. And we can put a link to what that podcast is in the bottom of this if you are looking this at a video blog. I am here with Kevin Martin, our business management specialist, and Dr. Terry Bates, who has done many years of research on Concord grape nutrition. And we are grateful to have you here. So thanks for joining us, Terry.
Happy to be here.
Morning.
As always.
So I guess we should just jump right into it. We're going to talk about how pH and CEC are interrelated and work together. I know you have some slides.
Yeah. So I saw your podcast last time, and Kevin's asked me this before about like, what do I look at when I get a soils test back? And I started thinking about it, like, what do I do? And I think I spend a lot of time right up front trying to orient myself to, okay, where did the sample come from? What's the soil type? You know, is it a well-drained gravel? You know, is it a Shenango gravel loam, or is it a Niagara silt loam, or a bust-eye? You know, something that might have some drainage problems. So I kind of orient myself to what is the, you know, what ballpark am I playing in? And then I probably the first 2 things I look at is organic matter, percent organic matter, and soil pH. Pretty much just from the standpoint of, okay, this is the ballpark I'm playing in. Do these match? Do these like I know if I'm in a Niagara silt loam, I'm probably expecting the organic matter to be a little bit higher. And the CEC to be a little bit higher, and the pH could be all over the board depending on what the vineyard manager has done. So kind of try to orient myself, and then it's like, okay, if everything looks like it's working right, then I spill into the nutrients. Okay, are we a little high on potassium or a little low on magnesium? So
may I interrupt you for one quick second? So I know what you're getting at when you say that, but what would you say is looking right? What is the range that you're considering looking right? Just for our listeners.
We'll talk about that. So, I mean, our rule of thumb is 3 to 5% organic matter in a well-drained, or in a drained soil, one that's not waterlogged. Doesn't have to be an excessively well-drained soil type, but you don't want any standing water issues in the vineyard, because that screws everything up. So 3 to 5% organic matter, pH. I know there's always controversy over soil pH and where exactly it should be. And, you know, we say 5.5 to 6.5. And the reality is, and this is driving home a lot of the work that we've done on precision viticulture, is like, there's a lot of variation in soil pH. You can take two soil samples in the same location and get different soil pHs, right? It varies. So it's good to take a composite soil sample, get an average, and work with that. I mean, this idea of, well, my soil pH is 5 and I want it to be 5.3. What am I going to do? And it's like, yeah, you're playing in the averages. You know, we just don't have the time, money, or resources to sample like we should. I know one of our very good cooperating growers, who probably going to listen to this podcast, are doing like 1 acre grid samples of soils. And that's awesome. You know, that somebody would take soil samples at that resolution. And we could take them at even higher resolution to find out what that spatial pattern is in the vineyard. But, you know, it's labor, it's expense to have that stuff analyzed.
Yeah, and you know, the one thing, just a practical thing I would add to those 1 acre grids is, depending on what you're using to spread your fertilizer, like there's no point in getting the pH of a local vine or an area that's smaller than what you can spread with your fertilizer. So like a lot of guys who are banding lime might be using a 20, 30, or 40 foot band. So you within that 40 feet, you're going to have to play the averages.
Yeah. So, okay. So I gave these slides last year at a coffee pot meeting, and I'm just going to use them as a crutch here again today because it just kind of hits the high points of the whole interaction of cation exchange capacity, soil pH, competition of cations, or if you have negative you have cations that are outcompeting your good cations. So let's just do a little rundown. So what is a cation? What is an anion, right? I always tell people, think of a battery, a cathode and an anode on a battery. Cations are positively charged ions. So think of table salt, right? Sodium chloride, and it's a solid, it's a salt, but when you dissolve it in water, you have sodium, which is a positively charged ion when dissolved in water, and chloride, which is a negatively charged. So one's a cation, one's an anion, and you have those things in your soil. Cation exchange capacity, which Jen explained very well last week, is that the soil surface charge has a net negative surface charge. And so negative and positive things are attracted to each other. So if you have a net negative surface charge on your soil particle, positively charged cations can attract, kind of be loosely held on by that soil and then exchanged with the soil solution so that so the plants can then take it up. A big thing I think that we deal with in our grape production is strength of cation absorption. So there are a lot of cations out there. As Jen talked about, we're interested in calcium, magnesium, and potassium mostly, but there are other ones out there like aluminum and iron that outcompete the good cations because they hang on to the soil particles more strongly, right? Their strength of cation absorption is better than, say, calcium or magnesium. A soil test may or may not, or you can calculate the base saturation from so there's a little bit of a conversion that goes on, but base saturation is telling you of your cation exchange capacity, what percentage is filled with the good stuff, the magnesium, potassium, calcium, and sodium, but sodium's a small player in our high rainfall soils. Soil pH is a measurement of the concentration of hydrogen ions in the soil solution. And that's also a cation. So that plays into the whole thing. So all these things are interrelated. Let's see.
That gets very difficult to understand when you know that they're a cation, so they're supposed to be positive, yet your pH goes down because of the the negative logarithm.
Yeah. It's a negative log of the hydrogen ion concentration. So as the concentration goes up, since there's a negative in front of that, the value is going down, and it's a logarithmic scale. So it a 1 point change in pH is a 10-fold change in the actual concentration.
Right.
So I always, my lovely days back in chemistry. So nutrition-wise, we're concerned with oxyanions, right? Nitrogen, nitrate, phosphate, and sulfate, right? These guys hook up with oxygen and are negatively charged. So we call them oxyanions. Most of those come from the decomposition of organic matter. So again, having a healthy soil with a lot of biological activity in it helps with that organic matter turnover and release of those nutrients. So we're going to kind of forget about that for now because we're talking about cation exchange. So the ones that we really are interested in are these base cations that are on one side of the periodic table, but the ones that mess us up, some of they're micronutrient metals, like, the plants do need iron, they do need copper, but if you have too much iron or too much aluminum, specifically in our soils, then these can outcompete and mess up the good guys. So again, this is just review from last week's podcast. your cation exchange capacity is the negative charge that is on that soil particle. So its ability to hang on to positively charged ions. Typically, your cation exchange goes up the more clay content you have in your soil and the type of clay that you have. Organic matter, as Jen said, has a high CEC, but it only makes up 3% of your soil. So it's got a high CEC, but a very low amount in the soil. So it does add to the cation exchange capacity, but not as big as you would hope it would. And as Kevin talked about, you can have CECs in certain soils that are really, really high. Typically in our soils, they're, whatever we said last week, like a CEC of 13 is kind of 13, 15 to 20. Our sandy gravel soils are lower and heavier clay soils are higher. Just to put it into a relative perspective. Okay, here's this whole idea of strength of cation absorption. So how well do these ions attract to the negative charges on the soil? So aluminum is very strong. So if you have a situation where you have a lot of soluble aluminum in the soil, into the soil water profile, then that is going to adhere to the exchange sites and it is going to outcompete everything else. And there's a really good reason why we say that, because our low pH soils cause that to happen.
And Terry, just when you say outcompetes, I think this is a good point to state what happens to the other stuff that's in the soil if it's being outcompeted.
Yeah, it gets leached.
It goes away.
It goes away. Yeah. If it doesn't have anything to hang on to, eventually it's gonna move with the bulk flow of water. So, as it, roots will take up nutrients. So nutrients go through the soil. They can flow through what we call bulk movement of the soil water, right? So it rains and then that water flushes through the soil and it's taking ions with it. Then when you're kind of at field capacity or below, where you have available plant water, those ions will diffuse from the soil particles through the water to the roots and be taken up by microorganisms, which then release it again for the plants to take up, the whole biology of the soil. Or roots will directly intercept those ions, but that is a very low amount because especially when you look at grapes, they have a low rooting density. So the amount of nutrients they can actually intercept is low. Grapevines help themselves by having vesicular or arbuscular mycorrhizae associations, which the plant gives carbohydrates to the fungus. The fungus has hyphae that go out into the soil and can pick up some of these nutrients and bring it back to the plant. So that helps. So that's kind of part of the interception part, but still in the big picture, diffusion of ions to the roots is the biggest component of that, right? Bulk flow is just after a rainstorm. Diffusion is most of the time, and then interception is a lot less. So we're really concerned with what ions are hanging onto the soil particles and constantly exchanging back and forth with the soil and the water in the soil. And if you have aluminum that is tying up all the exchange sites, calcium and magnesium and potassium have nowhere to go, and they just eventually get washed out of the soil profile.
Right. I also think it's important to state that when we're talking about ions and cations, you can kind of interchange that with the word nutrients or chemical nutrient. So
yes, I just lost my screen there for a second. Where'd everybody go? Okay, so this is exactly what we're talking about in our low pH soil. So because of the parent material, evolutionarily how our soils were formed, we have shellstone and sandstone based soils, so they're more acidic. And that specifically changes the availability of aluminum cation in the soil profile. So we usually say on a soil test, okay, I get my soil test, and I look at the soil pH, and then I look at aluminum. Just kind of the first two things I see to see if that's really jiving. Because If I get a soil test that comes back that's between 4 and 4 or 5, I'm probably going to see that the aluminum is above 200. And that's kind of our nervous point. If I see something above 200, I know that there's too much aluminum available. It's out competing potassium, magnesium, calcium on the exchange sites. It won't be available to the plant. So that's like the first, like if I was managing my soil pH, we usually say at least get it above 5. Like we can debate all day long, is 5.5 better than 5 or is 6.5 better than 5.5? It's getting it above 5 is like you've done 90% of the battle. So just do that, and then everything else you can tweak it.
Terry, I'm sorry. Maybe you're going to answer me right now.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe we should talk a bit about why it's important that we don't have aluminum monopolizing the cation exchange sites.
Yep. I am going to answer that.
I figured.
So just like this graphic shows, if I have the net negative charge on the soil particle, but it's all occupied, all the exchange capacity is dominated by aluminum, then calcium and potassium, magnesium, just as we said, they flush out and they're not available to the plant anymore. And so you have poor root growth, poor nutrient uptake, poor vine size, poor yield. And then you're saying, what is wrong with my vineyard? And I say, well, your soil pH is 4 and your roots are swimming in aluminum and nothing else, which is not good.
Thank you.
I don't want to eat aluminum.
So in that chart, we see, I think, individual data points showing just aluminum trending much lower as you raise the pH.
Yep.
What was the source of that data? And I guess the follow-up question to that is, do you see soil aluminum above 200 in situations where soil pH is 5 or 5.2 or maybe even 5.5?
Yeah, so this data is coming from multiple years of soil samples that have come through the lab. So
okay.
It started off when Phil Throop was the extension agent. So anytime like soil samples come in, I just put it into this database and then just start looking at all these different trends.
Okay.
So this data is actually coming from Concord Grower Vineyards in Western New York.
Okay.
So, and as you lime the soil and you get the pH above 5 and the 5.5 to 6, you drop aluminum out as a major competitor on the exchange sites. And now you can start worrying about, what's my balance of calcium, magnesium, and potassium? Because now I'm not worried about aluminum anymore.
Right. Well, and like I was, the first thing that jumped out at me is you're never above 200 as soon as you hit 5. Yes. Maybe 199 isn't great, but.
Yep. And that is a lesson I learned from Warren Stiles, who was a apple pomologist, nutrition guy at Cornell. And that was like one of the first conversations I ever had with him when I was at Cornell. They were doing a big study on Miller-Ondage and if there was a nutrient part of that, and the whole conversation about soil pH came up, and he was talking about aluminum and not being over 200, and that was in apples. So it just translated over to grapes because it has more to do with soil chemistry than it does plant biology.
Okay.
Here is the response of calcium, magnesium, and potassium in our soil. So all these soil samples that we come in from our vineyards. So as we change the soil pH, what's the availability of those 3 cations that we're most interested in? So it all fits together, right? So the soil pH drops and you have less calcium. Why? Because you have all this aluminum out there that's out competing. Same thing with magnesium. And then potassium, to a lesser extent, doesn't actually change all that much with soil pH. But it's the calcium and magnesium, and especially the magnesium. I don't know why this is. Like, it's for some reason, the magnesium response with potassium is much stronger than calcium. But they both go up. right? So as the pH goes up, you get rid of aluminum, and the amount of calcium is on the exchange sites goes up. Same thing with magnesium and potassium cations, it stays the same. So what we kind of tend to see is when we have low soil pH soils, we start to see magnesium deficiency. Because these two guys compete a lot, magnesium and potassium. If you have high potassium and very low magnesium, you tend to see magnesium deficiency in the vineyard. And as we raise the soil pH, you get a lot of magnesium, which outcompetes the potassium, and you start to see potassium deficiency. And this gets exaggerated when we have a big crop. So if you have a 1.5 pound vine and you're growing a 4 to 5 ton per acre crop, it actually really doesn't matter. Get your pH above 5 and talk to me when you have a problem.
Take home message is get that pH up.
Get the pH above 5, 5 is better. It gives you a little cushion. Plus there's all this variation as we talked about. So give yourself a little buffer. When you are getting into intensive production management, right? I'm trying to grow bigger vines. I'm trying to grow bigger crops. The crop has a high potassium demand. Then I know if I raise my soil pH to get good nutrient availability and balance, I know that my crop needs a lot of potassium. That's when I have to come in here with more supplemental potassium fertilizer and make sure I can meet that crop demand.
Terry, I don't know if this is the right place to ask this question, but when we do our soil recommends for growers who submit their soil test results, based off of the Northeast Wine Grape Guide that's out there that you and Dr. Tony Wolf from Virginia Tech put together and other authors, but based on that nutrition portion of it and the recommends, we sort of aim for a 6.8. And the reason, hoping that maybe we get to a 6.5 or a 6 at some point in there, is because we're in a no-till situation. So what is the movement of that lime through the soil solution in order to help? Do you know what I'm...
Yeah, so, okay. So you put down lime on your soil. And what is lime? It's calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate kind of mixed together. Dolomitic lime just has a higher percentage of magnesium carbonate. So that hits the soil and it gets rained on. Right. And then that dissociates into calcium, which is a positively charged cation, and carbonate. So, when magnesium and calcium dissociate and they go into the soil profile, and they can hook onto the cation exchange sites, or if your pH was too low, too much aluminum, it could leach through. That happens on the calcium and magnesium side. The carbonate, essentially it's Tums that you have, right, that you eat to cure stomach acid. The carbonates is what really is doing the work. It's what is soaking up the hydrogen ions and reducing the concentration of those free hydrogen ions in the soil solution and raising the pH, essentially, right? You're decreasing the concentration of valuable hydrogen. Right. That carbonate does not move very well in the soil. So in a pre-plant situation, we say, if your soil test comes back and says, you need to apply 4 tons of lime per acre, right? We say, put on 2 tons per acre, deep plow it in, and then put the other 2 tons per acre on top and disc it in. And that was, we're trying to just change the pH in as much of the soil profile as possible. But once you're in a planted vineyard, you put the lime down and it just takes forever for it to move. One scientist told me once that you have to almost neutralize your upper soil profile before it'll move. I don't think it's that bad, but it's slow to move.
Right.
So yeah, we had back in Fredonia, we had a planting of Riesling that Bob Poole worked on, and it was Riesling. It had received 10 tons of lime. It was like 1.5 to 2 tons of lime per year for, I don't know, whatever, 8 years. and it only changed the pH in the upper like 3 inches of the soil. And they had it on a deep rooted rootstock, and the roots were all down in the acid soil, and all the good nutrients were available in the upper soil. So the vine still had like an acid soil sickness.
Oh.
Yeah, I would say if you don't know what's going on because you bought a vineyard, it makes sense to take at least one sample that's deeper, because, you know, if from the soil profile of 8 inches to 20 inches, the pH is 7 because before you bought it, it used to be corn and you didn't know that.
Yeah.
It's going to completely, I mean, it should change the recommends. So you'd
Yep.
want to tell Jennifer that, hey, look, I need to actually keep this somewhere between, I don't know, 5, 5, and 6, or 6, 5, 7, 5. But if I get that upper zone up to 6, 5, or 7, it's never going to come down. So I can't do that. Whereas, if it's 4 down there, if you get a little too high, it'll just go back down.
Yeah. We have always discussed and have never done trenching in like a slurry of lime.
Mm-hmm.
In the state of Washington, where they have high soil pH, it's almost too high and they want to bring it down a little bit. They have this product called sulfuric acid. I don't even know if they still use it or not, but it's sulfuric acid essentially with a nitrogen source with it. And they trench that in because they're trying to create a zone in the subsoil where the roots can go, and it's the right soil pH. And we could probably do the same thing with like a slurry of lime, and we just have never done it. But it's possible.
Going.
Like, man, would that help? I don't know. We put it on the top of the soil, and it seems to work okay.
So if you could go back to that chart, the only thing I see looking at the data, calcium looks like it goes up when you raise the soil pH in a very linear, predictable way, at least based on that data. And magnesium, maybe to a certain extent, sort of potassium leveling out, but certainly with magnesium, once you hit 5, it looks sort of like it goes all over the place.
Yes, the variation starts going all over the place. And I think that has a lot to do with that competition between those two ions.
Okay.
And this is just some real life examples showing you exactly the same thing. We always get the question about, should I be targeting a ratio? So there's this kind of work all comes out of like corn, where the soil scientists say you want a 20-4-1 ratio. So again, this is in base saturation. So there's a little bit of a milli equivalent conversion. It's not direct parts per million of calcium. You have to do a little math to come up with these milli equivalent ratios. So again, it works for corn, and it would work for a moderately producing Concord vineyard, right? You're growing 4 to 5 tons per acre, whatever. You're hitting a crop load of 8, right? You're not stressing those vines very much. Having that ratio is fine. And if you want to manage your vineyard that way, that's great. So for us, it doesn't work when you're trying to produce 8 to 10 tons per acre of fruit, because Concord fruit, like bananas and other fruits, they have a high potassium requirement. So it's really the 4-to-1 that I get worried about. So if your magnesium is too high and your potassium is too low, you're going to get potassium deficiency in a high producing Concord vineyard. So it should be more like almost 1-to-1 or 2-to-1.
For the mag and potassium?
Yeah, that ratio should be much closer than 4-to-1, right? And really that is you're bumping up the potassium level. This I already talked about. This is the carbonates doing the action, right? The calcium and magnesium that's in the lime is just another cation and will hit the exchange sites, but it's the carbonate that sucks up protons, which changes the soil pH. And that's what causes all the other nice chemical reactions to work. And so this is like my summary slide. And I have this one posted on an article on the web too. about what happens. So this kind of brings it all together, right? So we're talking about cation exchange capacity, right? Your nutrient holding capacity of the soil, and how that changes with soil pH, and then the balance of the good cations that you want in your soil. So the USDA categorizes these soil pH ranges as very strong acid, moderate acid, slight acid, and neutral. And so if I have a soil that at pH 6 has a cation exchange capacity of, say, almost 10, just by dropping the soil pH down to 4.5 to 5, which a lot of our soils are there, it actually changes the cation exchange capacity. And Jen, I was reading your handout that you were talking about pH dependent cation exchange capacity. And a lot of that has to do with the organic matter so you're actually taking the same soil with a certain CEC and you're causing it to have less exchange capacity because the pH is so low. Some of that's because of the aluminum. Some of that's because of the change in the chemistry of the organic matter or whatever. So your ability, the pie is smaller. The ability of that soil to hang on to positively charged ions is less. And not only that, but now those exchange sites are filled up with hydrogen and iron and aluminum and not with the nutrients that your plants need. So again, if you take any message home from this is line your soils to get them up above 5 at least. That increases the cation exchange capacity. It reduces the concentration of hydrogens. By definition, you're changing the pH. You're reducing the amount of aluminum that's on the exchange sites. And you're making available to the plant calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And now as you raise that soil pH, the CEC goes up, right? The whole pie gets bigger. And now you are mostly concerned management-wise in a Concord vineyard in New York. I know this changes, different soils, different vineyards, different places. It changes a little bit. But for us, as we raise the pH, we get a lot of calcium availability, a lot of magnesium availability, and it starts to squeeze out the potassium. So we add potassium fertilizer back just to keep it, fighting against the tide so that there's enough potassium there for the plant. So I was just participated in a conference for the Maryland growers, and they were talking about how they have a high potassium problem can impact their wine quality. And they were talking about the soils down in that region have a lot of potassium. And even if they try to put magnesium on the soil to compete with potassium, there's just so much potassium there that they don't have, they can't stop the fruit from having a lot of potassium. So in that situation, so I always look at, so let's go first full circle. What do I look at when I first look at a soils test, and how do I frame it? So I always think of vineyard nutrition as what's my supply, what is my potential for root uptake, and what's my demand. And in that particular situation in Maryland, you have a lot of availability of potassium in the soil. You're growing wine grapes at probably fairly low crop loads. So the demand of the fruit is very low. So you have a high supply and a low demand, and that's causing problems. And management wise, I think the only way to deal with that is to short circuit it through the root system. So whether that's, root pruning or selection of the right rootstock that preferentially takes up magnesium over potassium, something like that. I guess from our perspective is we can have, if I raise my soil pH so that things are healthy in the soil, I run the risk of having too little supply of potassium, but I have a big crop that has a big demand. So I either have to make sure my supply is good or I have to do something with my root system to help it. I have to grow a bigger root system, have bigger vine size. Make sure I have a healthy soil so that mycorrhizae can help pick up potassium, or use a rootstock that preferentially picks up potassium, which our growers aren't going to do.
Right. So when you said like a ratio of 1 to 4 or 1 to 4 to 20, you can sort of ignore the calcium, but the 1 to 4 for magnesium and potassium is not enough in a highly producing, highly managed Concord vineyard where you're trying to grow a big crop. So is what you need in addition to that ratio to make sure you have a larger bucket, like the bucket you're showing here as you change the acid, or do you need to look at something else?
Yeah, we can do it. Like the way we get around it is, you know, I raise my soil pH to 5.5 to 6, and I add some potassium fertilizer. Now, whether or not with the price of potassium fertilizer, yeah.
That's sort of where I was headed. Like you said, you know, one thing you could do is like a 1 to 2 ratio, and then you probably know you'd be okay. So a 1 to 2 ratio in a slightly acid soil is a lot of potassium. In a moderately acid soil, it's quite a bit less that you'd have to add, I would think.
So
does that make sense?
You're comparing the slightly acid to moderate acid?
Yeah.
Or moderate to strong?
No, so slightly versus moderate, I would think. Yes. I don't think so. Yes. So by going from say 5.5 to 6 or 5.5 to 6.5 to maintain that ratio, you're going to have to add even more potassium.
Yes.
Right.
I agree with that.
So
that would, yes, and that would argue for not going as high as 6.5.
Right. Now, I wouldn't necessarily draw that conclusion in 2 years ago when it was fairly inexpensive in my mind to buy potassium, but you know, maybe in the short term that's you revisit that conclusion and not worry about pH if it's 5.5 or to 6.
You can keep your vines balanced, don't push them with a very heavy crop.
But
what?
But I mean, yeah. No. That costs more. If you're going to do that, I mean, if you're really going to push your crop, then as long as grape prices stay where they're at, you can revisit that higher pH, and as long as you're willing to put down more potassium, that's probably the right way to go. I only say probably because the fertilizer prices change so fast that, you know, if it's $2,000 a ton, maybe it's still not the right way to go. Just don't push your vines or roll the dice of slight deficiency or something. But as it stands today, when we're recording this, you know, if you're going to push your vines and they're already big, you can justify that potassium application.
Yeah. Yes. As you go from very strong acid to slight acid, you increase your vine size.
Right.
Well, I would say between moderate acid and slight acid, we did not see a significant increase in vine size, right? There's a big increase as you get that pH above 5 and you get rid of the aluminum toxicity. I mean, you see a huge jump in vine size. And then once you get up here, there's, you know, vine size is probably more a factor, like Jen is saying about crop load. You know, once I'm up there, I'm growing 2.5 pound vines, 3 pound vines, then it's, you know, did I hang 12 tons per acre or 10 or 8? And then that's probably having a bigger impact on vine size.
Right.
And then the interaction of, if I have a 3 pound vine or a 2.5 pound vine and I'm hanging a 12 ton per acre crop, I can almost guarantee you're going to see some potassium deficiency. We saw that this year. We saw a lot of potassium deficiency late in the season this year.
A lot of blood.
Well, yeah, and I guess that sort of makes me wonder, at least particularly when potassium or potash is at normal prices, like, are we doing enough? So if we know we're trying to get to a certain level of crop and we know we're going to push our Rivaz index to wherever that grower is comfortable pushing it, should we do more to try to avoid that deficiency, even if we can't avoid it altogether? Like, yes. Does it, right? Yeah. Does it pay?
I think we've been saying for a long time, if you're in that 8 to 10 ton per acre range, you should be doing at least a 200 pounds of potash maintenance dose every year.
Right.
Or watching your petioles really closely.
And getting to that potassium deficiency in those black leaves, they're not able to photosynthesize as well as the healthy leaves are to support that large crop. So.
Right. So that's a really big killer for vine size is potassium deficiency. So if I come up here between the 5.5, 6.5, you know, say I put on lime and I went from a 1 pound vine to a 3 pound vine, but then I have potassium deficiency, I go right back down to a 1 pound vine.
Huh.
Like potassium deficiency kills vine size, like worse than just about anything I've seen.
Well, and I feel like more immediately, I mean, yes, if you're looking at long-term viticulture or business, what you're saying is the most important thing, but more immediately, it's going to affect bricks in a way that maybe other nutrients don't as fast. In a time where we probably already know you have an issue with bricks, which is why you have the potassium deficiency in the first place. You know, if you regularly put on some potassium and you have moderately acid soil of 5.5 to 6, the reason you probably have potassium deficiency is you have a very large crop and now you have leaves that are not doing their thing. So.
Well, thank you, Terry.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's helped.
That's it for me.
Yeah.
All
And-
right.
Welcome
So,
anytime.
CEC, soil pH, availability of cations, and then the competition of those cations. You kind of put it all together.
I think you did.
Yeah,
a
I
good-
think sometimes it's really hard to talk about pH and just talk about lime because the reason you're doing it is for everything else, not for the pH of itself.
And that was sort of the premise of putting this series together, is to understand why we do what we do and how it
Right.
works together. So I really appreciate you being here, Terry. Thank
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We'll see.
you. We're gonna
We'll see y'all next week. Thank you guys for joining us. If you have any questions about this podcast or anything else you want to see, let us know. Jen, anything else?
No, have a great week, everybody. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Thanks.